On December 30, 2022, a bartender in the Polumina bar in La Guajira, Colombia, drew the attention of visitors. Although he had a long beard and wore a cap that partially covered his face, everyone immediately recognized him as the man whose pictures had been seen everywhere recently. This bartender appeared completely calm and hardly looked like a dangerous criminal. The police had been searching for this man for 3 months, reviewing hours of video footage and receiving numerous tips from witnesses. The search spanned 2,234 kilometers, or 150 hours of driving time, covering 15 cities, and witness statements were gathered from Ecuador, Spain, and Mexico. There were 28 interrogations, and about 10 people had contributed to the capture of the man. After all this effort, the police could not believe that they had finally found and would soon arrest the murderer of young Maria Belén. Would they succeed in catching and imprisoning the feared criminal, or would he escape again, leaving the crime unsolved? Maria Belén Bernal was born on March 14, 1988, in Quito, Ecuador. From a young age, she was passionate about law and known for always fighting for the justice of others. This passion led her to study law at the Central University, and as an excellent and curious student, she soon earned her master's in criminal procedure at Simon Bolivar University and her master's in oral procedures at Western California Law School. Parallel to her studies, Maria served as an administrative assistant at the General Prosecutor's Office. Besides her studies and work, she had a young son named Isaac, whose upbringing was solely helped by her mother, Elizabeth. Throughout this time, Maria also cared for her grandmother, who had cancer. All this showed Maria as an incredibly strong and determined girl. Her neighbors described her as a very kind and generous woman, who often provided them with free legal advice, earning much respect. In 2017, Maria Belén married Police Lieutenant Herman Casares. The newlyweds moved with Isaac to the Kangawa area in the south of Quito to live there. At her new location, Maria joined the Grow criminal defense firm, where she and 5 other women handled cases of abuse, gender-based violence, police defense, and child support. Maria lived literally to help people affected by abuse, even setting up a TikTok account to encourage people to report abuse cases. In one of her videos, the young woman recounted a case where she was a victim of a paternal relative and reminded her followers that abuse should not be ignored. Moreover, Maria advocated for feminism, posting a picture of herself on Facebook with the caption, "I was born to be free, not to be murdered." In 2021, when Maria was only 33 years old, she worked on the most high-profile case of her career, representing the family of Alejandro, name redacted, a man who died after being run over by a Metropolitan Transportation Authority officer in Quito. Maria proved that the police officers were responsible for the accident, winning the case and earning the respect of many of her colleagues. Unfortunately, she also made enemies. In mid-2022, Maria made a public statement in one of her TikTok videos, naming 2 police officers she believed threatened her life and health. Just a few months later, something terrible happened. The young woman disappeared on September 11, 2022. Maria Belén went to the General Alberto Enriquez Gallo Police School, located north of Quito, arriving at 12:45 a.m. in her red car. Although the visit schedule was not open, she was allowed to enter by identifying herself as the lieutenant's wife. After checking in, she drove to the building housing the officer's dormitory, taking only 5 minutes. She parked and went to her husband's room, hoping he would be alone, as they had an important conversation to have. When she entered and stood before her husband, she immediately noticed something that deeply shocked her. A visible mark on his neck, undoubtedly from another woman, indicating Herman was cheating. Fierce argument ensued between the two, with long-lasting screams and blows heard by everyone around them. One of the cadets nearby became suspicious and decided to report everything to the police chief, but received a sharp response to stay out of the couple's fight. Eventually, it became quiet, and everyone thought the argument was over. However, Maria's departure from the building was not registered, and no one heard from her again, not even the cadets present at the scene. On Monday, September 13th, Herman went to the National Police Directorate for the investigation of deaths, disappearances, kidnappings, and extortions to report his wife's disappearance, as no one in the family had heard from her in 2 days. General Alan Luna, head of the police logistics department, took over the case and asked Herman to leave, assuring him that everything would be done to find the missing woman. The next day, investigators made an unexpected visit to Herman, asking for permission to search his room, which angered him greatly, and he refused. However, he soon agreed to cooperate and appeared at the prosecutor's office to describe the day he last saw his wife. Herman Casares stated that after a tense argument, they got into Maria's car together, but on the way home, they argued again, and she got out on Simon Bolivar Avenue to take a taxi. At the end of his statement, Herman arrogantly declared that he hoped the police would believe his wife had disappeared. Herman finished his statement at 2:40 p.m. and did not leave the police station until 2:45 a.m. Police officers had no reason to detain him, but they sensed something was wrong. They checked his statements and placed Casares under surveillance, only releasing him afterward. Immediately afterward, Herman met his parents and sister outside the prosecutor's office, got on his BMW motorcycle, and disappeared into the night. Early the following morning, police visited Casares' sister and announced they had obtained a search warrant and started searching. They found nothing compromising except the fact that the motorcycle Herman had driven away on was missing from the garage. This gave the police the opportunity to set up surveillance and tail the man. But it was too late, as the husband and main suspect in Maria Belón's disappearance gone into hiding. Due to Casares' actions, the police immediately removed the names of the officers Maria had mentioned in her TikTok video from the list of suspects. Everything seemed to point to Casares' guilt, so the investigators focused all their efforts on proving this theory. They questioned cadets present at the time of Maria Belón's disappearance, and one revealed that she had not been invited to the party that evening. After she suddenly appeared at her husband's door, they locked themselves in, and long screams and blows were heard from inside. An hour later, witnesses saw Herman Casares leave the room with a bundle of blankets. Other witnesses saw him load the bundle into his wife's car and drive off in an unknown direction. Police reports also indicate that the man left the building through the back door, not the front. The whole situation was very suspicious and needed investigation. Additionally, there were reports of more screams coming from Herman's room between 4:30 and 5 a.m., this time of a more intimate nature. Based on witness statements, the police obtained a search warrant for the lieutenant's room. During the search, they found empty beer bottles, bloodstains on the mattress, and strange handprints on the wall. Maria's car, eventually found outside the couple's house, was also examined with luminol fluid. The analysis revealed that the entire car was smeared with blood. The blood found was sent for a DNA test and compared with Maria's mother's DNA. Unfortunately, the result was positive, leaving no doubt that Maria was dead. General Major of the National Police, Fausto Salinas, ensured Herman Casares' dismissal from the police force, while the Interior Minister and the head of the Police Academy filed a complaint to include him in the investigation and guarantee the strictest punishment for Herman. Shortly after, the search warrant and arrest of Herman as a suspect in the alleged disappearance of his wife were officially issued. His picture was broadcast nationwide in all news bulletins. Alongside Herman's picture, the media also spread photos of Belón, urging the public to contact the police if they had any information about her whereabouts. Maria's mother, Elizabeth, refused to believe her daughter was dead until the body was found, leading the search operation and scouring the last known location of Maria. Elizabeth gained the support of several community organizations, collectively pushing for a better search for the missing woman to accelerate the process and finally uncover the truth. Maria's son, Isaac, was not left out, setting up a Twitter account to seek help in finding his mother. He stated that his stepfather was the last person to see her alive and that the police offered a $20,000 reward for information leading to his capture. At the end of this notice, Isaac wrote clear words directed at Herman, promising to find him even if he hid under a rock. Several days of intensive searching yielded results, and on September 21st, an event occurred that changed everything. Maria Belón's body was found just 10 minutes from the police academy in a ravine on the hill of Castilla. Maria was identified by the clothing she wore the day she disappeared, her tattoo. The forensic examination determined the cause of death was strangulation. Maria was strangled with a belt, but she also suffered severe head injuries. On the right side, she had a large hematoma that spread to her face, ear, and back of her head, and on the other side, under her hair, was another hematoma that led to a brain hemorrhage. However, the woman's body showed no other severe injuries to the chest, abdomen, pelvis, back, or arms. This fact contradicted witness statements that saw Herman carrying his wife's body wrapped in a blanket and dragging it to the car. The man couldn't have carried her the entire way, and if he had dragged her along the ground, there would have been many more injuries on her body. Investigators suspected that the girl's body was most likely dragged by two people holding her arms and legs to avoid further injury. It was also noted that although the body was discovered only 3 days after her disappearance, it showed little decomposition and did not even have the characteristic strong odor. This suggested the body was buried shortly before its discovery on Castilla Hill, reinforcing the belief that Herman did not act alone and had help from someone at the police academy. Initially, Cadet Jocelyn Sanchez, who was in the next room when the argument between Maria and Herman broke out, was suspected as an accomplice. The prosecutor's office immediately issued a warrant for her arrest, and the woman quickly shared her version of events from that terrible night. On Saturday, September 10th, Jocelyn attended a party hosted by her training colleagues. There, she encountered a very drunk Herman, flirted extensively with her, making her uncomfortable. Jocelyn couldn't refuse him, as he held a higher position, and she feared retaliation if she did. Eventually, the lieutenant asked her to accompany him to his room, and she obeyed as if it were an order. In his room, Herman received a call saying his wife had come to see him and he should speak with her as she was very angry. Jocelyn remained in her room, swearing she hadn't even seen Maria Belón. She said she had not slept for 21 hours due to her security shift, so she fell into a deep sleep and did not hear the sounds of the fight or Maria's cries for help. If she had witnessed the crime, she would have defended the victim, not as a police officer, but as a woman. However, further compromising evidence against Jocelyn was later found. Her lawyer handed over a video recording where Jocelyn confessed to having intercourse with Herman in the early hours after Maria's disappearance. Jocelyn later tried to justify herself, claiming the confession was illegally recorded and her words were edited. She also filed a complaint against her lawyer, demanding his disbarment for breaching confidentiality. It turned out that the video was not the only evidence of Jocelyn's knowledge of the crime. Her friend provided their WhatsApp correspondence to the police, in which Jocelyn mentioned the argument between Herman and Maria. A few days after this conversation and Maria's body's discovery, Jocelyn asked her friend to delete the messages. Through witness testimonies and evidence collection, prosecutor's office gathered at least 35 pieces of substantial evidence linking Jocelyn to Maria Belón's disappearance, enabling charges of complicity. The case resonated strongly with the public. Police officers were the main suspect. Soon after information about Jocelyn's arrest was released, the media and many community organizations publicly accused the police academy institutions of crime. Upon learning of Maria's body's discovery, her mother turned directly to the country's president, Guillermo Lasso, via a Twitter account, seeking justice for Maria. In her appeal, Elizabeth emphasized that the perpetrators were police academy members and that the main suspect was still at large. Dozens of civil society organizations, including feminist groups, held demonstrations nationwide, calling the Ecuadorian National Police to account. The public saw the murder as a state crime, committed in a police facility by on-duty officers. Maria's funeral took place on Thursday, September 22nd. She was buried at Mount Olive in Coma Santa. Simultaneously, a public assembly was held at the Central University of Ecuador Theater in Quito, where concerned people advocated for justice for the victim. Government authorities responded to the allegations, claiming Herman's act was an isolated incident that tarnished the institution's reputation. Interior Minister Patricio Carrillo made a sharp statement on a TV show, expressing regret over the crime and believing it was a common crime committed by an ordinary person. This statement caused great public outrage, shaking the foundations of the government system. General Freddy Goes, National Director of Criminal Police Investigations, and General Giovanni Panza, National Director of Civil Security and Public Order, were suspended. It is unclear why these generals were suspended, but it seems the president wanted to defuse the situation this way. President Guillermo Lasso also publicly announced that he had given police Major Fausto Llenas a week to produce final results in capturing Lieutenant Casares, and demanded Patricio Carrillo's resignation for his controversial comment. Lasso also apologized publicly, saying that as the Republic's president, he should not have allowed such an atrocious crime, especially not in an institution meant to train police officers to protect citizens. Furthermore, he ordered intensified efforts to apprehend the perpetrator. While Herman remained at large, public distrust in the police grew daily. Just as it seemed the man had escaped punishment, he was spotted by witnesses in Tulcan, a border town in northern Ecuador, near the Rumichaca Bridge connecting the country with Colombia. There, the man waited for several hours at the foot of a mountain, waiting for others to cross the border. On September 15th, Herman was caught on surveillance cameras entering the West Tunnel at Vio Medellín Santa Fe in Antioch, traveling without luggage and alone. On the 23rd of the same month, the police recorded a call made to Herman's phone. 6 days later, Ecuadorian authorities met with Colombian police to search for the perpetrator jointly. On November 19th, the area mentioned in Herman's phone calls at Lago Achira was investigated. On December 7th, the Ecuadorian police requested assistance from Interpol's Fugitive Unit and the Colombian Technical Investigation Unit. On December 30th, man's location was discovered. Witnesses identified him as a worker in a bar in Palomina. Herman was unrecognizable, now sporting a long beard and a cap covering half his face. However, he stood out when he thanked customers for their tips in Ecuadorian dialect. These customers decided to report their suspicions to the police. He was arrested the same day. He offered no resistance, and the papers for his return to Ecuador were soon ready. Although the perpetrator had not yet testified, and the investigation was not concluded, the Ecuadorian president immediately declared after his arrest that the perpetrator would be punished to the fullest extent. As expected, Herman did not deny his guilt and was soon taken to the high-security prison La Roque in Lago Achira, where he detailed the crime. On the night of September 11th, Herman was under the influence of alcohol when he received more than 10 calls from his wife. When he finally answered, he heard Maria speaking angrily, upset about his condition, and said she would soon visit him for a serious conversation. When Maria entered the room, she immediately noticed the marks on Herman's neck and directly asked if he had cheated on her. Herman did not hide it, even cheerfully admitting to cheating on her for 5 years. Soon, the couple started shouting at each other, and at some point, Herman began hitting Maria. The woman called for help about 10 times. No one helped. To silence Maria, Herman used judo techniques on her and later strangled her out of anger. Around 1 a.m., Herman realized Maria was dead. He wrapped her body in a blanket and carried it to the car, leaving the body in the trunk. Next day, he continued acting as if nothing had happened. In his spare time, he went to the room where the crime was committed and tried to eliminate the evidence. In the evening, around 7:30 p.m., he drove away in his wife's car. His behavior aroused no suspicion, as it seemed like he was just doing his job. No one checked his room or car. He went to Casitawa Hill, dug a hole, and buried the body. Herman claimed he acted alone, without anyone's help. On Monday after the crime, he worked as usual until he received a call from his mother-in-law asking about Maria's whereabouts. Herman replied that she had gone in an unknown direction after their argument. He hadn't heard from her since. Elizabeth insisted he file a missing persons report. Herman hesitated for several hours but eventually did so, hoping to divert suspicion. After describing what happened that night, he exercised his right to remain silent, refusing to answer his lawyer's question, believing his punishment was inevitable. The trial began late as new evidence continued to emerge. Maria Bellin's phone recording was discovered, capturing her screams and cries for help, stating she was being killed. She was. This recording was kept secret and also influenced Joseline's conviction, proving she was not present at the scene during the crime. Although it is still unknown how much Joseline knew about the events, she was eventually released from custody. After her release, she gave a speech thanking the women who supported her during her imprisonment. At the same moment, Elizabeth interrupted, telling her that she must feel guilty for Maria's death for the rest of her life, as she had a sexual relationship with Herman that day and did not respond to the cries for help. It is currently believed that 3 people are involved in Maria Bellin's death: Herman, Joseline Sanchez, and Police Lieutenant Alfonso Cacho. The latter was charged for not acting during the crime, although he was in the same building and should have heard the screams. Herman is the only one serving his sentence in La Roque prison. His lawyers demand their client be convicted of manslaughter and not femicide, as the man acted under the influence of alcohol. Although the 3 people were convicted, the entire police force was involved, as none of them intervened in the crime. On January 15th, prosecution's investigation phase ended. It is expected that the prosecution will request a date for the evaluation and preparatory hearing to decide if all those involved will be charged. All Ecuadorians are closely following the case. Thousands of women hope Maria's murderer will receive the harshest punishment, and the case will be classified as femicide. Society also hopes this case will impact the prevention of domestic violence and the actions of law enforcement agencies, which should protect people, not let them die. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, and take care of yourselves. See you in the next video.
Today we delve into a story that will make you look back and ask yourself, did you do everything right in your life? Probably many will answer yes after watching, because Philip's life resembles more of a lunatic asylum. Only a few managed to change their lives and free themselves from the abyss. Nevertheless, there are examples where people who found themselves in a dead end found the strength to start anew. However, if one decides to make such changes, one should bear in mind that not everyone in the immediate environment is ready for them. Philip Taylor was born in Florida in 1966. He lived in a large family with several brothers and sisters. He was described as a good-natured person who lacked something in life. He was always searching for himself. This was clearly evident from a young age. Philip carelessly jumped from one idea to the next and had difficulty concentrating on one thing for long. His school performance also suffered as a result. However, that changed in his youth when Philip found a holiday job in a car repair shop during high school. There he discovered his interest in mechanics. The young Philip therefore dropped out of high school to work with engines and carburetors. He really enjoyed this work. The young man became an excellent specialist whom the whole town knew, but even after that, his dreamy nature still drew him to adventure. When the young man turned 20, he decided to leave Florida and move to Missouri. This brought with it great changes. He first had to get used to the colder climate and find a new job. Philip did not go to Ossack without reason. He immediately found a job as a mechanic in a car repair shop with a man named Marvin. At their first meeting, Marvin immediately gave him a task. He was supposed to fix a car breakdown and was impressed by how easily Philip succeeded. The two became friends. A warm friendship developed between the men. The friends got along well not only in the workshop but also outside. They often visited local bars and restaurants to have a drink and chat. A waitress named Melina Aldrich worked in one of the restaurants. She was a young mother with a 3-year-old daughter whom she was raising alone after her divorce. Philip Taylor seemed to intentionally go to this restaurant more often because he liked Melina. For a time, they only exchanged glances. Philip didn't dare to approach her. When he finally mustered the courage, the woman reciprocated his feelings. A romantic relationship began. Their relationship developed quickly, and so the couple married in 1994. His wife described Philip as an excellent husband and father. He was gentle and caring, which is why the newlyweds immediately decided to expand their family. About a year after the marriage, they had a daughter whom they named Shelby. During this time, Philip worked hard to meet the family's growing needs. The rest of the time he dedicated to his children and his wife. He accepted his wife's daughter as his own, which also impressed his beloved. However, his character remained unchanged. Over time, family life became boring to him. He longed for new experiences. During one of his visits to a bar, he met an 18-year-old woman named April Quick. She was working there for the summer. After a few meetings, feelings developed between the two. However, Philip wanted more. When he confessed his feelings to her, she reciprocated. Thus, a mistress entered the man's life. He still loved Melina, sincerely did not want to leave his daughters, blamed himself, but he could not help himself. He liked April and was flattered by the attention of his young mistress. Unfortunately, in order to find a solution, Philip resorted to a traditional method that is often mistakenly used to deal with problems: alcohol. He began regularly visiting bars and drinking more and more. Alcoholic beverages became his daily companions. Philip was not confrontational or aggressive, no matter how much he drank. His new girlfriend was 10 years younger than Philip Taylor. She seemed satisfied with this relationship and did not want to break up with him. He considered several times how he could end this relationship under various pretexts, but he did not want to lose April. After a year of this love triangle, Philip even started renting a separate house for his mistress where she lived. The young man came to her as if she were his second wife. The double life lasted until 1998. Although Philip drank a lot of alcohol, he remained calm. But Melina became increasingly unhappy that her husband was constantly drinking and rarely at home. Melina wanted to help her husband overcome his addiction and supported him in going through withdrawal, but it didn't help. Therefore, Melina decided that the girls should not grow up with an alcoholic and filed for divorce. The trigger for this decision was the discovery of her husband's affair. When the first wife found out about April, the continuation of the marriage was unthinkable. Against this background, Philip decided during this time to leave his family and return to Florida. The children and his wife naturally reacted negatively to this, but Philip did not plan to stay in Missouri. He took his mistress with him and returned to his small homeland, almost completely breaking off contact with Melina and the girls. He stopped drinking and quickly found a new job in a car repair shop. Now they lived as husband and wife. April became pregnant and gave birth to a second child about a year after they began living together. Philip decided to try again, but during this time many realized that family life and children were probably not for him. It is obvious that all of this constituted an enormous burden for him. The man was under stress and drank more and more to cope with it. It was probably exactly this that led to him being hospitalized at the beginning of 2001 due to health problems. Against this backdrop, the man lost his job. Now it was too difficult to make ends meet, which only worsened the situation. Philip underwent surgery and then immediately went to a rehabilitation clinic as he was ready to tackle his problems and start a new life. At this point, the relationship with April had cooled somewhat, but both desperately wanted everything to go back to how it was before. While Philip was in rehab, the young mother in Florida had nothing to do. Her male relatives did not provide her with the necessary support. The search for work and a babysitter proved difficult. There was no money. When April's family offered her help, she decided to return to Missouri. During this time, the young mother, with the support of her family, found a part-time job and waited for her husband's return. When Philip left the detox clinic, he immediately made his way to Missouri to his mistress and children. The couple rented a house. For a while, Philip actually managed to stay away from alcohol. After the move, it turned out that the young mother was pregnant again. Thus, a boy was born. It cannot be ruled out that exactly this event triggered a stressful situation again. Philip collapsed and started drinking again. Finally, he realized that he really wasn't in the right place and no longer wanted to be part of this family. He simply fled and returned to Florida alone, leaving the young April with 3 children behind. During this time, the man spent a lot of time with his friends. It seemed as if he blamed his wives for all the problems. The situation repeated itself. First, he left his first wife based on the same principle. Now April. The man provided neither of them with any support. However, there were reasons for this. He had succumbed to old addictions, couldn't find work, had no money, and was down and out again. All this led to his first wife suing him for non-payment of child support. However, this did not enable him to make the payments. He simply didn't have the means to do so. For this reason, Philip was arrested shortly after his return to Florida for non-payment. According to his own statements, he felt so bad during this time that he was ready for any change. Despite the absurdity of this situation, the man came to the conclusion that a prison sentence might even help him cope with his problems. Philip ended up in prison. During his imprisonment, he did not drink alcohol, lost weight, and overcame his addiction. He became a completely different person. Immediately after his release, the man returned to Missouri. At this point, he had been unemployed for a long time and now decided that he had a new chance to start over. It seemed as if the man had overcome his harmful habits. He found a job as a car mechanic and after half a year was able to open his own workshop after obtaining a license. Philip planned to move and set up a large service business. At least this project was in the realization phase. He bought a plot of land in Missouri, on which he set up a caravan as an office and living space. Now his goal was to build a house here with a large workshop where he could work on cars. For this, he took out a loan and began another, but already more mature, change in his life. He decided to resume contact with his ex-wives and children who had received no support from him up until then. Melina acted loyally. She had long since cooled down and was no longer angry with Philip, however. It was more difficult with April. She had a tougher character. Furthermore, she still remembered very well how her husband had abandoned her at the decisive moment. Everyone who knew Philip Taylor well noticed that he had indeed changed and was apparently on the path to recovery. He had realized that family was more important than alcohol, had overcome his addiction, and now saw this as an important step toward the life he had always dreamed of. Unfortunately, fate was against him precisely at this time, and it was an insurmountable task to cope with another blow of fate. Late in the evening of September 10, 2010, 2 random passers-by came through the park where Philip Taylor had lived after moving. The witnesses discovered a man lying lifeless on the ground. They immediately called the police. When police officers arrived at the scene, it turned out that the unknown person was already dead. The body was still warm, apparently. The attack had happened only shortly before the witnesses discovered it. The police began a search. The man's pockets were empty and his shirt was missing. A wallet, which was also empty, lay by his feet. His ID was found inside and it was determined to be the Philip Taylor. When the sheriff heard about it, he said he had known the man personally. Philip had worked here as a car mechanic, had been quite well known, and had planned to open a workshop in the town. The man was found face down not far from the road. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. The attacker had shot him in the back of the head at close range. At first glance, it appeared to be a robbery. The emptied pockets and the wallet thrown on the ground confirmed this assumption. However, upon closer inspection of the victim, investigators discovered traces of stab wounds on the back of his head. Furthermore, his hands were badly cut, indicating an attempt to fight off the killer. Due to the nature of the wounds and the use of multiple weapons, police concluded that there may have been multiple attackers. Philip had fought desperately and suffered too many injuries, suggesting premeditated murder rather than a random incident. The attack, committed in anger, suggested a personal motive. It became clear that the robbery was merely staged, a rather clumsy attempt to trick the investigators. The perpetrator or perpetrators acted unprofessionally and were therefore unlikely to be experienced criminals. It was important to get to know the victim better to uncover conflict situations and acquaintances from his inner circle who might resort to a weapon or even incite accomplices for the attack. The investigators delved into the deceased's biography, as it made the most sense to look for the perpetrator in his immediate environment. They immediately received a valuable clue in the form of the history of his relationships with several women. The police learned about a love triangle and that the deceased was addicted to alcohol and had abandoned his wives and children in critical moments. All of this could have given rise to hatred or jealousy, and the murder would have been an act of revenge. The police did not immediately learn that Philip had a relationship with a new woman named Tammy. The relationship was so new that only the deceased's best friend knew about it. The news of the new relationship complicated the investigation. According to the friend, Philip and his new girlfriend had met shortly before the crime. The unknown woman was a woman who was in the process of separation, but officially not yet divorced from her former husband. She, as well as her ex-husband, was on the list of suspects. Tammy was a very mysterious person. The deceased's cell phone was not found. Therefore, apart from her name, there was no information about her. To get more information, including who Tammy was, the investigators went to the caravan where Philip had lived. There they found packaging for a mobile phone that the deceased had purchased shortly before the tragedy. However, he had kept money inside it. Despite intensive searching, the police officers could not find the man's mobile phone. The perpetrators had probably disposed of it after the attack, but the box found made it possible to find out the device's serial number and thus other valuable data. During the search of the caravan, a copy of a letter was found that had been written a few days before his death. In it, Philip Taylor addressed April, who was living in Arkansas at the time. In the letter, he stated that he wanted to restore the relationship with his children. He asked his ex-wife for a meeting and urged her not to obstruct the restoration of the relationship with his children. This letter remained unanswered, although the man had requested a response by September 18. It seemed as if they had been discussing this topic for some time. His mistress might have resisted, as Philip emphasized in his letter that he had been paying child support for 2 years and had the right to see his children. According to the law, he was ready to go to court if an amicable settlement could not be reached. Thanks to the mobile operator's data, Philip's phone could be located using signals and transmission masts. Thus, the direction in which the signal was going could be reconstructed. It turned out that it was heading in the direction where April and her 3 sons lived on that fateful evening of September 10. In parallel, the authorities contacted Malina, Philip's first wife. She reported that he had been a pleasant, quiet person, even during his alcohol addiction. However, his addiction and his subsequent inappropriate behavior made living together impossible. The mother simply did not want the children to have to watch their father slowly kill himself. Furthermore, Melina told in detail about her relationship with April and described the events related to the appearance of this woman in her life. The young mistress seemed to be more aggressive than her husband. According to the first wife, Philip asked her shortly before his death to allow him to resume the relationship with his daughters. Melina had no objection, so the father began to visit his daughters regularly. Recently, there were actually no problems with him. From the beginning, Melina was ready to cooperate with the investigators and seemed genuinely affected by what had happened. The woman repeatedly emphasized that it hurt her that Philip had died just at the moment when he had truly become a good father. She did not seem like a criminal. Now the authorities decided to focus on Tammy and April. They checked Philip's mobile phone and analyzed the calls he received on the day of his death. As it turned out, he was called twice from the same number around. These were the last calls after which Philip was killed. Unfortunately, the police were unable to trace these cell phone numbers because they were not registered. They had to contact the telephone company to check the data. It turned out that the calls were made from Arkansas using a disposable cell phone purchased at Walmart. This store was located near April's new home. The investigators went to this store to check the surveillance camera recordings. This allowed them to actually see the person who had bought the device. Of course, the police officers hoped to see April or at least Tammy, but the camera had captured another woman about whom no one had previously heard or known anything. Philip's extravagant lifestyle and constant search for new experiences had probably driven him to his death. But who was this woman who had bought the disposable cell phone? Why had she called the deceased before his death? Melina and Philip's friends could not identify her in the photo. Suddenly, the police received a call. April contacted the authorities and informed them that her house had been robbed. The woman stated that she had been at the cinema with her children and a friend, and upon returning, found the front door broken open. By the time the police arrived, she had already searched the apartment and determined that a .22 caliber pistol was missing. Interestingly, Philip Taylor had been shot with exactly the same weapon. Despite April's eloquence, the police officers reacted with great skepticism to her words. It seemed there were too many coincidences and that the officers were dealing with a criminal who was desperately trying to lead the investigation into a dead end. A search warrant for the suspect's apartment was obtained. The detectives stormed in with a search. In the inner courtyard of the house, they discovered a burn site still fresh enough to destroy evidence linking the criminal to the murder. Suspicion intensified, as charred clothing and a mobile phone were found there. Examination confirmed that all of this belonged to Philip Taylor. When investigators checked the surveillance camera footage of the cinema where April allegedly went with the children, they could not confirm her statement. She was not there during the specified screening. Thereupon, she changed her story and began desperately trying to justify herself. In particular, she said that she had replied to Philip's letter, but that it had apparently been lost and had not arrived. She justified her calls shortly before his death by saying that she wanted to discuss issues concerning both parents with the children. The woman was noticeably nervous from the start of communication with the authorities and claimed that Philip had always been very cruel to her. According to the worried mother, this was exactly the reason for obstructing contact between the father and the children. She was simply afraid that they would be in constant danger. Her statements were in clear contradiction to the statements of everyone who knew Philip Taylor well, which made the situation even more disturbing. At the end of the interrogation, April asked for a lawyer. 32-year-old April Quick was arrested on suspicion of Philip's murder. Since she was facing a life sentence, April agreed to cooperate with investigators. She was offered a deal in exchange for a milder sentence. The suspect decided to confess to a less serious crime. As it turned out, April was already in a relationship with another man at that time and had a fairly well-established life. Therefore, she did not like Philip's sudden reappearance at all. Originally, his ex-wife was very angry with him and did not want to let him see the children because he was prone to domestic violence. The man insisted that his ex-wife had to grant him access to the children, which April did not want, but Philip threatened to sue. The woman wanted to meet Philip to discuss all possible options, but he would not listen to her. The mother realized that something had to be done. She feared that Philip would use her relationship with another man against her in court. According to April's statement, she drove to this meeting together with her friend Amy Herring, but did not reveal until the end that she was present. The woman wanted to speak with Philip alone. According to her statement, the meeting was not peaceful. An argument broke out, during which the ex-husband grabbed her hair in a fit of rage. The friend who was watching the meeting from the car perceived this as a threat. A .22 caliber pistol was in the car, which was supposed to be used for deterrence. The friend reached for the gun because she suspected it was loaded and unsecured. The worst part was that Philip did not react to Amy's warning and continued to behave aggressively towards April. Therefore, the friend shot accidentally. After confessing this, April burst into tears. She informed the police that her fingerprints were clearly on the weapon, but she had not pulled the trigger. Amy had left her fingerprints on it, therefore they decided to dispose of the weapon. The women knew that they would definitely get into trouble with the police. Therefore, they tried to erase the traces of the attack. They took some of Philip's belongings and burned them, including his cell phone, hoping that he could not be tracked down in the investigation this way. But they were wrong because this only drew more attention. Despite this confession, the police immediately suspected that April was lying again. The distance from which the shot was fired did not match her statement that it was an accident. Clear traces of powder gases could be seen on the back of the victim's head, which can only occur with a shot fired at close range. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet indicated that the shot was fired from top to bottom, as if the victim had been forced to his knees before his execution. It did not appear to be a random case of self-defense. Furthermore, April did not mention the knife that had obviously been used in the attack. To reconcile her story with the facts determined by the police, she began to change it again. The next addition was the knife that Philip allegedly used, but which the women were able to render harmless. He supposedly received several blows to the neck precisely during the fight. The part of the story about the accidental shot remained almost unchanged. April did not comment on the police's statement that not a single witness could be found who would describe Philip as an aggressive or violent person. With the exception of April's statements, he had not been noticed for violent behavior throughout his life. Philip was calm and composed despite his harmful habits. The investigators' distrust was only reinforced because April did not have a single defensive wound. Given the aggressive behavior she described, at least abrasions and cuts should have remained on her body, let alone more serious injuries. However, not a single scratch could be found on her. In the investigators' view, the picture of this encounter looked completely different. Everything was planned. They wanted to scare him or attack him. The motive was simple: revenge out of resentment. April was probably supposed to distract Philip during the conversation. Then Amy showed up and attacked Philip from behind. The women injured him with knives and shot him. Then they took his clothes, and specifically his shirt, and burned them along with his cell phone. It was a setup. The evidence was destroyed in the backyard. The motive for the attack was assumed to be that she wanted to deny the father contact with the children. However, the perpetrators offered no comments. Despite all the inconsistencies between her statement and the evidence, a deal was made with April. 29-year-old Amy was arrested and interrogated. She confirmed April's story, albeit with some deviations. Amy looked very similar to the woman in the surveillance videos from the store. She confirmed that she had bought a disposable cell phone. Her cooperation was taken into account, so the woman was charged with second-degree murder. Amy was sentenced to 15 years in prison and April to 20 years. Philip Taylor's relatives considered this a real setback for justice, as these penalties for killing an overall good person seemed ridiculously light. Unfortunately, a revision of the verdict could not be achieved. Despite the mild sentences, both perpetrators appealed, but this was also unsuccessful. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves. On February 28, successful businessman Tyler Pratt went to a meeting that was supposed to solve his financial problems. Together with his girlfriend Jordan, he arrived in an industrial area on the outskirts of the city, where old acquaintances were waiting for him. A few hours later, the police discovered his body at this location. Jordan, who miraculously survived, was taken to the hospital in critical condition. The only thing she could still say before losing consciousness were two names. These names would shock not only their relatives but all of Canada. Lucy Lai was born in 1995 in Shenzhen, one of China's largest economic centers. She was the eldest of three twin sisters, born only a few minutes apart. Her parents, yearning for a better life, soon decided to leave China and settle in Canada. However, the young daughters were left in the care of relatives. The family was only reunited 7 years later when the girls were brought to Toronto. Lucy's father, a man of strong character and business acumen, organized a driving school for immigrants and helped the newcomers obtain a driver's license. But the main source of the family's success was her mother, Winnie Lai. Thanks to her ability to find loopholes in tax legislation and manage capital wisely, her large financial company quickly established itself in the market. Winnie Lai earned a reputation as an influential player in the financial world. Over time, her influence became so great that business publications wrote about her, and her image appeared alongside Canada's leading politicians. The path to success demanded sacrifices, and the most important of these was family. Winnie was only minimally involved in raising her children, and when she did find time, it was only to monitor their performance. She demanded perfect results in all areas: studies, sports, and the development of intellectual and artistic skills. The daughters had to speak several languages, play musical instruments, understand finance, and win competitions and Olympiads. Mistakes and weaknesses were not forgiven by their mother. From childhood, Lucy tried to live up to these expectations, but soon realized that her successes were taken for granted. Her mother did not rejoice in her achievements. She considered them the norm. In this race for perfection, Lucy began to feel like an extra in her own family. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away from her world, Oliver Carafa lived in a small Slovak town. His family was not wealthy, but his parents strove to give their son a good education and the opportunity to build a decent life. At the age of 8, he found himself in Canada, where the family had emigrated in search of new prospects. Unlike Lucy, his childhood was not planned according to protocol. Oliver grew up free and independent, but as a teenager, he began to deviate from the planned path. He was drawn to risk and forbidden pleasures. He was looking for the adrenaline he could get by breaking rules. He was not interested in his studies, and discipline seemed unnecessary to him. Lucy's and Oliver's paths crossed when they attended the same school. She was an example of a diligent student. He was the one who often violated discipline. Despite the obvious differences between the two, a friendship developed. Oliver was someone who could afford not to meet expectations, and Lucy liked that. For her, he was the first person who didn't judge her based on her achievements. Over time, their relationship developed into a romance. It was a first feeling, far removed from calculations and family pressure. However, like many teenage stories, this romance was short-lived. They quickly realized they were too different, and the future they envisioned did not suit them. After graduating from high school, their paths separated forever. Lucy followed her mother's plan and enrolled in finance at a renowned university. A career in the family business, success, and status awaited her. Oliver chose a different path. His risk-taking and desire for quick money led him into a world that is difficult to escape. At the age of missing number in original German text, he got behind the wheel while severely intoxicated. That night, the car he was driving crashed into a lamppost. A passenger died instantly. Another passenger was seriously injured. Oliver himself was almost unharmed, but his life was changed forever. The court sentenced him to 5 years in prison and imposed a 15-year driving ban. Years later, fate brought him back together with Lucy. But this time, their meeting was not an innocent teenage crush. Now they would be connected by shared secrets, crime, and the pursuit of a life that always costs more than it seems. Lucy had enrolled at one of Canada's best universities and chosen to study finance and global economics. However, this decision was not her own. Her mother had predetermined which field of study her children should pursue, as they would hold key positions in the family business in the future. Lucy recognized that her studies were not a path to self-fulfillment, but just another stage in a plan she hadn't chosen. Throughout her studies, she was monitored and urged to achieve exceptional results. It was not enough to finish her studies. She had to do it with the best grades. Every mistake was considered a failure, and the slightest deviation from the planned path led to her mother's disappointment. Lucy did not give up and continued. She received awards for excellent academic performance, completed internships at leading companies, and created an impeccable resume. After graduation, she immediately gravitated towards working in the family business. Winnie instructed her daughter to familiarize herself with the company's financial operations and gradually take over part of the management. In the eyes of others, she was the epitome of success, but she herself felt trapped. While Lucy lived in a world of strict discipline and career pressure, Oliver, while serving his sentence for the accident, made new acquaintances and connections. Oliver's cellmates included people involved in illegal businesses, the stolen car trade, and various fraudulent schemes. They quickly recognized his penchant for risk and ambition. He listened to them, learned, and memorized procedures and ways to circumvent the law. This knowledge would later help him build his own shady businesses. In 2019, Oliver was released after 5 years of imprisonment. The return to a normal life proved more difficult than he had expected. Without education and official professional experience, legal ways of earning money did not bring the desired income. Furthermore, the driving ban deprived Oliver of his accustomed freedom of movement. During this time, he looked for ways to start a new life. He tried working as a model to generate income. His photos began appearing in advertising campaigns for small agencies. Although this didn't bring in much money, it allowed him to project the image of a successful man. At this moment, his gaze fell back on Lucy. They hadn't seen each other in years. In school, she had been a promising, ambitious girl predicted to have a brilliant future, but now she had changed. Her social media page was full of pictures of lavish parties, travels, and expensive restaurants. She had become a popular blogger. Her followers grew and brands offered her collaborations. Oliver decided to write to her. The conversation began with memories of the past and then moved to a discussion about life. Lucy confessed that she had formally achieved everything her mother wanted, but she didn't feel happy. Her career had been built on the expectations of others. Oliver, for his part, described himself as someone who had been through difficulties and now wanted to change his life. Their meeting took place a few days after their first conversation. They sat across from each other in a restaurant and talked about how much they had changed. Oliver seemed confident and spoke of new prospects. Lucy listened and was attracted by his freedom. He was not bound by corporate standards. He did not live by the rules set by his family. A few weeks after their meeting, Lucy made a decision that surprised even herself. She packed her bags and moved in with Oliver. In one fell swoop, she broke all ties to her previous life and put an end to her mother's plans. She chose the unknown rather than a predetermined future. At that moment, she did not realize that she was embarking on a path that would lead not to freedom, but to disaster. Lucy's decision to leave the family was a shock to her mother. Winnie was unaccustomed to disobedience. Everyone around her adhered to the established rules, and she expected the same from her daughters. When she learned that Lucy had decided to live with Oliver, a man with a criminal record, Winnie reacted fiercely. In the blink of an eye, her bank accounts were frozen and all financial income was cut off. Lucy did not return. On the contrary, this decision only strengthened her desire to prove that she could live without her mother's help. However, it quickly became clear that her independence was an illusion. After only a few weeks, she realized that blogging alone could not earn her enough money. She was accustomed to a high standard of living, but now her financial stability depended solely on Oliver. Unlike her, he had no fears. He confidently stated that he had sources of income and that she shouldn't worry. Oliver said he earned his money through investments, buying and selling cars, rare goods, and other lucrative deals. Lucy asked no questions. She wanted to believe that it was really that simple. Gradually, she became more and more involved in Oliver's affairs. Because of a court order, Oliver could no longer drive, so Lucy became his personal driver. At first, it seemed like a minor thing. She sometimes waited in the car for him while he took care of his business. Eventually, she noticed that the routes were always different and the trips mostly took place in the evenings. When Oliver first asked Lucy to sign documents in her name, she hesitated. She was worried because the documents concerned the purchase of cars she had never seen. He explained that this was part of his business. He exported cars and resold them to wealthy clients. He assured her that it was legal and only required a few workarounds. Lucy did not object. She signed papers, created invoices, and helped with transfers. While Lucy thought she was running a business, she was actually already part of the criminal schemes. Oliver used her status to give his deals an appearance of legitimacy, but she had not yet realized how far this went. Despite the lack of financial stability, one could say the couple lived in luxury. Their apartment was in an upscale Toronto neighborhood. Their cars were changed every few months. In restaurants, they didn't look at the prices. Designer clothes, jewelry, expensive trips, all this became their usual lifestyle. Lucy didn't notice that she was gradually becoming dependent not only on Oliver's money but also on him. He instilled in her that they were a team, that she couldn't maintain this standard of living without him. She believed him and didn't realize that she was already on the brink of disaster. In the spring of 2020, Oliver received an offer that could take his business to the next level. Through mutual friends, he met Tyler Pratt, a man who at first glance looked like a typical successful entrepreneur. He had several companies that offered nutritional supplements and investment projects, among other things. However, his real income came from a different source. Tyler was a key figure in the Canadian illegal substance business, which he imported and distributed in large quantities. Tyler was looking for new investments. After his divorce, he wanted to legalize part of his assets and gradually withdraw from the shadow economy. He needed a reliable partner who could offer him a promising business. Oliver was the perfect fit for this role. He was young, ambitious, had connections, and seemed confident in his success. Oliver invited Tyler to dinner, where he presented his company and introduced himself as an experienced player in logistics and international transactions. He spoke convincingly about opportunities in trade, investments in imported cars and real estate, but the main topic was a new idea: the supply of safety equipment. At that time, the world was in chaos due to a pandemic. States, private clinics, and companies urgently purchased medical masks, protective suits, gloves, and other equipment. Oliver presented a project that he believed could bring in millions. He planned to buy protective equipment in Asia and sell it at inflated prices in Western markets. It looked like a 100% win-win situation. Demand was huge and suppliers were ready to pay cash. Tyler was excited about the idea. Although he was an experienced businessman, he was unfamiliar with the legal market. Oliver convinced him that he could organize the deals with the help of his connections. Tyler invested the first $200,000 in the project, expecting to quickly double or even triple his investment in the coming weeks. Oliver continued to maintain the illusion of being actively engaged. He showed his partner fake purchase reports, scans of contracts with supposedly reliable suppliers, and bank documents confirming the transactions. Tyler was confident that his money was working. A month later, Oliver said that the project needed to be expanded and more investment was required. He said demand was growing, which meant there was an opportunity to earn even more money. Tyler, euphoric about these prospects, invested another $500,000. He did not realize that he had just signed his own death warrant. A few weeks after the second investment, Tyler noticed the first warning signs. He transferred the money, but the delivery of the safety equipment never began. Oliver repeatedly assured him that everything was under control, but the excuses became less and less convincing. He cited logistical delays, complicated customs checks, and bureaucratic delays. Tyler was not a naive man. He knew how business worked and was not used to losing money. As his demands for delivery documents became more persistent, Oliver realized the situation was spiraling out of control. Panic set in because Tyler demanded accountability and Oliver had nothing to show for it. In his desperation, Oliver turned to Lucy. He explained that they urgently needed to find a way to appease Tyler and buy time. The only solution they could think of was check fraud. Lucy took an old form from her mother's papers, wrote a check for $1.5 million, and requested this amount from the Lai family account. She was sure that the money would disappear into her mother's financial flows and she wouldn't even notice the disappearance. However, the bank became suspicious. A manager who knew the Lai family well noticed the absence of Winnie's signature and requested confirmation of the transaction. The transaction was then suspended. The plan with the fake check had failed. Lucy and Oliver were in a desperate situation. Tyler no longer believed their explanations. He gave them a final deadline. Either he would get his money or there would be severe consequences. Oliver quickly realized that the only way to solve the problem was to eliminate Tyler. He discussed the situation with Lucy, but her reaction was far from enthusiastic. She realized they had backed themselves into a corner, but murder seemed extreme to her. However, Oliver assured her that they had no other choice. Tyler was not the type to forgive deception, and their lives could be in danger. A plan was quickly conceived. They invited Tyler and his girlfriend Jordan to a meeting, ostensibly to discuss a new project. Oliver said he had found a way to compensate for their losses and get his money back. Tyler didn't believe it but decided to give Oliver one last chance. He agreed to come to the meeting. On February 28, 2021, around 6 p.m., Tyler and Jordan arrived at the agreed location, a warehouse in an industrial area. They arrived in their SUV unaware that an ambush awaited them outside the gate. Oliver had prepared in advance. He bought a used car with cash to leave no trace. They also acquired a burner phone to contact Tyler. Lucy put on a wig to alter her appearance. As Tyler got out of the car, Oliver immediately drew his weapon. The first shots were aimed at Jordan. He knew that the investigation would take a completely different turn if he eliminated the witness. The bullets hit the woman in the chest and she fell, losing consciousness. Tyler froze on the spot, realizing this was the end. Oliver, giving him no time to react, aimed his weapon at him and pulled the trigger without hesitation. A few shots and Tyler collapsed on the ground, instantly unconscious. Lucy stood beside him without intervening, but she already knew there was no turning back. Her entire life had been turned upside down in that moment. They were not just fraudsters, they were now murderers. Oliver quickly went over to Tyler's SUV to see if his girlfriend was still alive. When he saw that she showed no signs of life, he placed her body next to the car and told Lucy to leave. Oliver and Lucy were confident that they had eliminated all witnesses. They left the hangar, leaving two motionless bodies behind, and fled, certain that no one would connect them to the crime. However, an hour after the attack, something happened that they could not have foreseen. Around 7:20 p.m., a passing truck driver noticed a woman lying at the entrance of the hangar. It was Jordan. Despite her injuries, she not only survived but was able to move, which caught the attention of a passerby. The man immediately called the police and an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived at the scene, they found Jordan still breathing. She was unconscious, but her pulse remained constant. The doctors didn't know how long she had been lying on the cold concrete floor, but one thing was certain. She had miraculously survived the attack. She was taken to a hospital where surgeons performed an emergency operation. The police quickly assessed the situation. Tyler's body was found in the hangar. He had died instantly from multiple gunshot wounds. There were neither surveillance cameras nor witnesses, but the key to solving the crime lay in the hospital room. While Jordan fought for her life, investigators began their inquiries. They checked her phone calls, her texts, and her last movements. Within a few hours, it became clear that she and Tyler had been in contact with Oliver before the attack. Their meeting was not accidental. It was a planned meeting organized by the person who was now the main suspect. At this time, Oliver and Lucy did not yet know that their plan had gone wrong. They had been following the news, saw the headlines about the unknown murderer, and were sure that everything had gone perfectly. But when the news anchor mentioned that one of the victims had survived and was now in stable condition, their confidence was replaced by fear. Lucy was stunned, and Oliver began pacing around the room. It became clear to him that Jordan had seen their faces, heard their voices, and knew who the meeting had been with. If she regained consciousness, the police would have a full description of their attackers. Now the only thing they could do was run away. Oliver contacted his connections. He knew who could get fake passports and organize a secure exit. They had money. The large sum stolen from Tyler was still in their accounts. The only question was speed. A few hours later, they met with the people who had prepared their new documents. Lucy received a fake passport in the name of a Philippine citizen. Oliver became a Hungarian citizen. With these documents, they could fly to Europe unhindered. Their first destination was Prague. They chose it because it was suitable as a transit stop. High tourist traffic, low suspicion. They took a hotel room for a short time, hoping to lay low and figure out what to do next. The first few days were relatively calm. They tried not to draw attention and only went out when necessary, but the fear never left them. Oliver constantly checked the news, waiting for an international search warrant. Lucy barely spoke a word. The realization that they were no longer just fraudsters but also murderers haunted her. A few days later, they moved to Bratislava and then to Budapest. They thought the frequent changes of location would allow them to cover their tracks, but in reality, they only gave the police more clues. The temporary feeling of security turned out to be an illusion. They were sure that the police would not be able to find them quickly, but after a few weeks, the situation changed. International services began working, and their trail gradually narrowed. The criminals did not yet know that an arrest was only a matter of time. While Oliver and Lucy tried to go into hiding in Europe, the Canadian police worked continuously. The first clue to solving the crime was the phone calls. Technicians determined that the SIM card Oliver used for communication had been purchased the day before at a store in Toronto. Further investigations led detectives to an individual who confirmed Lucy, who, unaware of the criminals' plans, provided them with another SIM card for use. After questioning, she stated that it was Lucy who had asked her for the card. This was serious evidence against them. The next piece of evidence was found thanks to video surveillance. Investigators examined the footage from the area where the hangar was located and determined that a few days before the attack, a car drove there that was registered to a fictitious person, but the silhouettes of occupants resembling Oliver and Lucy could be seen. Furthermore, cameras at their apartment recorded them leaving on the evening of February 28th and returning late at night. This strengthened the police's suspicion. After Jordan regained consciousness, the investigators received confirmation. She could clearly remember who had attacked her. Lucy and Oliver were identified as the assailants. This was enough to issue an arrest warrant. The Canadian police forwarded the information to Interpol, and within a few days, Oliver and Lucy were wanted internationally. Their description, photos, and last known details were forwarded to European law enforcement agencies. Meanwhile, the couple continued to hide, but their movements did not go unnoticed. The Hungarian police received a tip and began tracking suspicious foreigners matching the description. Through a mistake by Oliver, their escape was soon halted. When he paid the rent for the apartment, he used fake documents that made the owner suspicious. The owner reported the suspicious tenants and their identities were checked. When it turned out that they were on an international wanted list, a team of agents traveled to their location. Oliver and Lucy had no time to act. They were arrested directly in the apartment. Lucy tried to explain that it was a mistake, but the officers already knew exactly whom they were arresting. A few hours later, they were taken to a detention center where the extradition process to Canada began. Their escape was over. Now they had to answer for their actions. In the spring of 2024, the trial against Lucy Lai and Oliver Carafa attracted significant public attention. The case became one of the most discussed in Canada. Two young people who could have led successful lives chose a criminal path that ended in murder. The trial lasted several weeks. The prosecution presented a detailed indictment. They submitted evidence linking Lucy and Oliver to the murder of Tyler Pratt and the attempted murder of Jordan. Phone records, surveillance footage, financial transactions, and the testimony of a surviving witness were presented. Lucy's defense strategy consisted of shifting the blame onto Oliver. She claimed she had nothing to do with planning the crime, knew nothing of the intent to kill Tyler, and was herself a victim of manipulation. She claimed Oliver controlled everything, and she merely followed him without noticing the magnitude of what was happening. However, the evidence contradicted this. The prosecution presented proof that Lucy was actively involved in the fraud, helped hide money, organized a meeting with Tyler, and even attempted to forge financial documents. The fact that she ran away and used fake passports strengthened the prosecution's argument. Oliver, on the other hand, refused to testify. His defense attempted to prove that the crime was not planned and was the result of a conflict, but the court did not accept these arguments. The final blow for Lucy came from the video footage showing her concealing her face when she met Tyler, as well as the evidence that she had purchased the SIM card used to set the trap. This evidence ultimately discredited her version of events. The verdict was harsh but predictable. Oliver and Lucy were found guilty of murder, fraud, and fleeing justice. Both received life sentences with the possibility of parole after a maximum of 25 years. The trial was over, but its consequences were discussed in the community for a long time. Lucy, who once lived in a world of luxury and privilege, now found herself in a prison cell. Oliver, accustomed to adrenaline and adventure, lost his freedom forever. Their fates became an example of how greed and the desire for quick money can lead to collapse. Society was divided into two camps. Some saw Tyler Pratt as a victim, a man who trusted the wrong people and paid for it with his life. His family and relatives defended him, emphasizing that he had tried to leave his past behind and enter a legitimate business. Others believed that he was responsible for his own death because he knew whom he was dealing with and knowingly engaged in dubious financial transactions. Lucy Lai became a symbol of downfall. She was born into a privileged world and had the chance to lead a wealthy life without crime. Yet she chose a different path. She ran away from her mother, got involved in fraud, and ultimately criminality. Her mother, Winnie Lai, refused to comment after her daughter's arrest. Her status in the business world was shaken, but she chose to remain silent, and over time she virtually erased her daughter's name from her life and did not participate in her defense. Oliver, on the other hand, was not an unexpected criminal to many. His path began with difficulties as a young man. To most people, he was a predictable criminal who was bound to end up in prison sooner or later. This incident ruined the lives of several people. Tyler died. Jordan lost not only her loved one, but also her unborn child. According to the investigation, Jordan was pregnant at the time of the crime. The story, which began with the greed for quick money, ended in tragedy. Everyone involved in this story ultimately paid their price: money, freedom, life. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves. The town of Laurel in Yellowstone County, Montana, is known to many as a picturesque rural area with many hiking trails, campgrounds, and lakes on the outskirts, as well as a bustling, lively downtown with plenty of activity. Parades and festivals are frequent in town, and strolling through the streets is a great way to discover interesting shops and good restaurants and enjoy the friendly atmosphere of the locals. The town has a population of about 7,000, including 57-year-old Lori Bray. Lori worked at one of the local casinos and apparently lived a peaceful and quiet life. She preferred a secluded life, spending her days at home with only her dogs, Mac and Nikki. Lori's family was truly large. She had a son, Justin, with whom she spoke every day, 5 grandchildren, many siblings, and 8 nieces and nephews. Lori had a great love of animals, especially dogs. She often donated money to rescue centers and organizations dedicated to finding new loving owners for dogs, and she also worked as a foster carer. Her boss and former roommate, Kathy, said Lori was probably the sweetest, kindest, and gentlest person in the world. She said Lori had a soft voice, a wonderful personality, and a welcoming smile. She loved to help everyone and was someone people could always turn to. Her son, Justin, said that sometimes it could be a double-edged sword and that she had too much trust in people, never seeing the bad in someone, even when they gave them reason to doubt them. September 30, 2019 was a completely ordinary day. Lori was working the evening shift at Cedar Ridge Casino, and just before midnight she finished work, locked everything up, and went straight home. A few hours later, at 8:31 a.m. on October 1, something terrible happened. At Lori's casino, it was noticed that the woman was already arriving very late for her shift, without prior notice that she would be late or even a no-show. At the same time, her boss, Kathy, was driving to work herself on an empty, isolated road that stretched for miles without anything but fields. Suddenly, she saw what seemed to her to be Lori's car. It was parked at an odd angle at an intersection, and it didn't look like anyone was inside. Lori didn't live anywhere near that area, and since there were no businesses or other houses nearby, it made no sense for her or her car to be there. Kathy stopped but didn't go near Lori's car. Instead, she decided to call Justin. She asked him to drive to his mother's house, wondering if she was panicking about something. At the time, Kathy didn't know that Justin had also sensed something was wrong that morning. He hadn't received his usual morning call from his mother, and that seemed odd to him. Justin made his way to her house, ringing her phone along the way, but the silence was deafening. When he got there, he noticed that her car wasn't parked in front of the house, which made the knot in his stomach tighten even more. He went inside and was shocked to find that her two dogs, Macca and Mickey, were unattended and obviously hungry, something his mother would never allow. Looking around her house, he found nothing. Her bed was neatly made. There was no sign that Lori had eaten breakfast this morning, and everything seemed eerily quiet. While it was certainly possible that Lori had made the bed and washed everything before leaving, it looked more like she hadn't been home since last night. He called Kathy back, and the two agreed to check the car together. Justin immediately confirmed it was his mother's 2003 Chrysler sedan. The sunroof was open, the drivability indicator was broken, and on the floor under the rear seats, Justin found Lori's purse, and her iPhone was also on the floor, lighting up when it received calls. Although Justin wanted to open and start the car, after a closer look, he had the feeling that this was a job for the police and no one else, so they decided to call 911. When the police arrived on the scene and examined Lori's car, they found bloodstains covering more than half of the back seat and a muddy boot print above the passenger door. They also found Lori's clothes scattered everywhere, including her underwear, which looked damaged, as if it had been forcibly removed. The hooks on her bra were bent, and there was blood on some of her clothing as well. Everything indicated that a brutal crime had taken place. Lori Bray was now reported missing. A large search effort was quickly organized. Many people in the city knew her and wanted to help. Her friends began posting on social media, with one person writing, "She would never leave her dogs, it's her world, and someone will know something. Even small clues will help in this case. I ask everyone to pray that she is found safe and sound." People also began organizing their own search parties, and everyone took to the streets to look for Lori. The case immediately garnered media and public attention because it was so unusual for something like this to happen in that area. The area where her car was found was overgrown with grass and muddy, and the field seemed to stretch on forever, making it incredibly difficult to find evidence in such a place. The news immediately showed several friends, volunteers, and police officers searching the field north of Lovell, trying to find something that would lead them to Lori Bray. It also mentioned that she was last seen Tuesday evening as she left work. Deputy David J. said in an interview, "It all happened at the intersection of Buffalo Tree Road and Laurel Airport Road near the cemetery." Relatives and friends of the missing woman, numbering 670 people, began searching the area at 10 a.m. according to Sheriff Mike Linder. Linder said they are examining the area where Lori's car was found. We have not been able to find any clues and do not understand why it was there, and our main concern now is to find the woman and help her. He also said that the car had already been noticed during a patrol the day before, but at that time they were unable to locate the owner and left it unattended. Police also decided to incorporate technical aspects into the investigation. They immediately began tracing Lori's phone calls and the like, as well as executing several search warrants. Linder added that they have already searched most of the area and will now wait for new information. As night fell, the already difficult search of the premises became almost impossible, so the police asked the volunteers to leave, which they did very reluctantly. The police asked Kathy for the video footage from the casino, which she provided, along with the names of most of the people and their contact information, so the police could interview them. It turned out that on the night she was last seen, Lori was closing the casino as usual, stocking up and cleaning up. Two women briefly approached her at the bar, and Kathy said she knew them, they were regulars. Then another man working with one of the women appeared. Kathy said his name was Diego Hernandez. Diego ordered a drink, and Lori asked to check his ID before serving him. A few minutes later, Lori pointed to the clock, which meant the casino was closing and he had to leave. A brief conversation ensued, after which Lori continued her work to close the casino. At 11:20 p.m., Lori packed her bag, locked the door, and left. The casino was already closed and her car was parked right in front of the doors. She went back briefly, apparently to talk to someone before getting into her car, but there was another person sitting in the car next to her. This person was Diego, which the police quickly determined. When he got into the passenger seat, there wasn't a soul around. Investigators needed to determine why he left with her and if he had seen or heard anything that night, such as another customer being late or acting strangely shortly before midnight on October 1. Diego Hernandez was located at his address and confirmed that he was the one seen on the cameras, and that Lori had kindly offered him a ride home after they had chatted at the casino. He said he only went to the casino because he could get free alcohol. He arrived around 9:00 p.m. and stayed for a few hours, using a few machines and chatting with a few people. Diego said Lori dropped him off at his house, said goodbye, hugged her, and then went to a friend's house to continue the evening. He said he hadn't seen Lori since she left. It was just a fleeting encounter and a kind gesture from the woman. The officers didn't believe Diego's words and couldn't help noticing his condition. His entire face was covered in fresh scratches. One officer inquired and said it looked as if someone had fought him, which seemed a little suspicious. But Diego said the scratches had occurred 2 days earlier, when he had a fight with a friend named Nick after visiting a strip club. Diego added that Nick was wearing rings and that these left the cuts when he was hit. During the interrogation, Diego appeared calm and confident. There was nothing to suggest that the man was lying in his statement. That was the end of the interrogation and the police left. The police found Nick. He admitted that they had a scuffle in his car, saying that Diego suddenly started to freak out. Nick said that at one point he grabbed Diego's head before pushing him out of the car, but he added that he didn't cause any scratches and was shocked to see the condition of his face. Nick had no reason to lie to the officers, as he had already admitted to the altercation and the scratches had nothing to do with the incident. Although Nick's story overlapped with Diego's, the police had no other theory than Diego's involvement in the crime. Diego was still the last known person to have been with Lori and, by his own account, was in her car. The camera from Cater's casino couldn't confirm whether he had any scratches on his face at the time, but additional footage from another bar taken just hours earlier showed that he had no scratches on his face at all. In the early morning hours of October 2, the search team deployed with renewed strength and the search continued throughout the day. At 7:30 p.m., investigators received the call they had been expecting. A man was riding his ATV in a wooded area when he made a gruesome discovery. He found the body of a woman lying naked on the ground. He didn't need to get any closer to realize she had been severely abused and was already dead. The police were certain they knew exactly who it could have been, but made no statement. That same evening, the media reported that the woman's body had been found, but that the police had never confirmed the identity of the murdered woman. Although the search for Lori Bray was called off immediately after the news broke, the public learned that numerous officers and medical examiners had been working at the scene, and the identity of the murdered woman was soon confirmed. Police found Lori Bray's body just under 2 miles from where she had abandoned her car. She was lying completely naked and in the fetal position at the bottom of a ditch. She was covered in abrasions and bruises, had blood in her hair, swelling around both eyes, a swollen lip, and several broken ribs. It was later determined that she died by strangulation, but the coroner determined that blunt force was applied to her face. It was confirmed that Lori had been sexually assaulted. However, despite the injuries and extensive blood loss, no semen was found. Some marks on her body suggested that she had either been dragged or pushed down the hill, but not that she had been killed there. Investigators now knew that Lori had likely been killed in her own car and then taken there. Beside her body lay her small cross necklace, and next to it was a fairly clear boot print that appeared to match the one found in Lori's car. The condition of Lori's body when it was found was shocking. Officials said the level of violence and brutality was staggering and determined that whoever did this was simply a monster. Colleagues and friends were baffled as to who could have done such a thing. They said Lori was popular with the regulars and had a good reputation in the community, and she never mentioned any problems. While police received several more potential leads when it emerged that she had been involved in abusive and controlling relationships in the past, and perhaps these men should have been investigated, Lori's previous partners were ruled out as suspects for various reasons. Fear spread among the locals, who feared that a violent criminal could still be walking the streets of Laurel. One resident even suggested that Lori's death could seriously impact life in this town. Nevertheless, everyone put their worries aside to come together for Lori's family and friends and raise money to help, to care for her dogs, support Justin, and donate money for funeral expenses. Police were able to locate several locations where Lori's phone rang between midnight and 3 a.m. Once, she called from her car while near the casino, another time from the location where her body was found, and another time near Diego's house. The calls from Diego's home and the surrounding area were made shortly before the body was found, by which time she should have already been dead. This was pretty strong evidence against Diego. Even more interesting is that Diego had been at another bar a few hours before going to the casino. He spent the evening urging random women to drive him home, including the woman working behind the bar. She refused several times, saying his pushy behavior made her very uncomfortable. On October 4, investigators executed a search warrant at Diego's apartment. They seized the clothes he had worn that evening. Some of them appeared to be bleached or freshly laundered, which was immediately noticeable since his room was full of dirty laundry. Police also found a pair of soaked Nike sneakers that had also just been washed. The print on these sneakers matched the print found in Lori's car and next to her body. Investigators began searching Diego's phone, and it turned out that just hours after Lori's murder, he had conducted some interesting internet searches on topics such as how long do investigations take, how long do FBI names last, and is there a deadline for a case to be considered unsolved and the search closed. Diego went to the police station, provided a DNA sample, and then changed his previous statement. He said he and Lori spent some time together in the car, talking and having a good relationship. Afterward, they smoked a few cigarettes before having sex outside his house, but he swore he never saw her again. At that point, the police didn't have enough evidence to arrest him, so he wasn't detained and was allowed to go home. But soon all the tests were completed, and after that they were able to press charges. Diego's DNA matched the DNA found on Lori's body and under her fingernails. Diego was subpoenaed again and changed his story one last time. He now claimed that he and Lori had actually been in a relationship for over a year and were just keeping it secret. That's why he lied so much. He stated that Lori had asked him to keep their relationship secret so no one would find out, and he didn't know how to explain it. However, the police examined Lori's phone records for a period of 1 year before her death, and there was no indication that they had ever spoken. This was confirmed by the casino's cameras, which recorded Lori asking him for his ID and talking to him, then telling him they were closing. Until that night, their phones had never been in the same locations, and they had never called each other. On October 8, 22-year-old Diego Hernandez was arrested at his home in Laurel around 8 p.m. and booked into the Yellowstone County Correctional Facility for the murder of Lori Bray. 2 days later, he was charged with first-degree murder. This came as a real shock to everyone in the county. Diego was well-known and well-liked. He always seemed polite, friendly, and fairly quiet. His friends also said he was down-to-earth and sincere, and his actions surprised them. Police believed that, given the video recordings showing him getting into the car voluntarily and his earlier coercion, Lori had offered to drive him home as he had originally stated, likely out of pity for him as it was already late. Outside Diego's home, he likely attempted to assault the woman, but she resisted. Lori's strength was insufficient, and Diego carried out his intended act, beating and strangling his victim. The reason he claimed the couple had consensual sex was because he knew the police would make the connection once his DNA was taken, so he decided to change his statement. The prosecutor said the level of violence and brutality Lori Bray faced was unimaginable. He said her death was brutal and horrific, and once more evidence was found against Diego, more charges could be filed. Diego never confessed to his actions and continued to deny harming the woman. As rumors of an arrest spread, a memorial service was held for Lori at her favorite park where she walked her dogs. Charity events continued to be held, with all the money going to charities Lori had once greatly helped. At one of the fundraisers, many people described Bray as a kind, loving woman who would do anything to help her friends. Some in the crowd carried a banner reading "Lori is loved," and some wore purple t-shirts reading "We will always love you." Christy Salbinson had been Lori's closest neighbor for 3 years. She had no idea that so many people in Bray cared about her. Christy revealed, "When I saw all of this, I realized that everyone in town knew and loved Lori. She was a great person who was willing to sacrifice everything she had for others. Since this tragedy, our town has grown even closer, and today we are all here to light candles in Lori's memory." Diego Hernandez pleaded not guilty, and the now 24-year-old man will go to trial in March 2021. He maintained his innocence and continued to claim that the couple had a secret relationship, which infuriated Lori's family and friends, who considered it a blatant lie. In his opening statements, Diego's defense attorney pointed out that Lori's abandoned car may have been disturbed or contaminated before it was searched by law enforcement, so the evidence found had to be questioned. The lawyer also stated that methadone was found in her system, for which she did not have a prescription. They hypothesized that if she took methadone and didn't tell anyone, she could have easily concealed her relationship with Diego. The prosecution considered this theory ridiculous and nonsensical. The prosecution had compelling arguments against this claim and called DNA and forensic experts as witnesses. The prosecution was able to present dozens of photographs, witness statements linking Diego to his victim, as well as physical evidence in the form of upholstery from the back seat of Lori's car and DNA tests that showed Diego's DNA was found under her fingernails. Hernandez's lawyers attempted to undermine the DNA evidence by questioning the crime lab's procedure and pointing out that repeat tests were improperly conducted. Troy Shabana of the sheriff's office used data from Verizon Wireless to determine where Bray's phone was on the night of October 1. RTT stands for Range to Tower and is used by the carrier to connect cell towers to cell phones and determine their location. He was also able to provide evidence that the technology works. Cell phone geolocation analysis expert Michael Fegley also achieved similar results. He created a video presentation using Google Earth that also shows Bray's cell phone location on the morning of October 1. This data showed that the phone was already at the crime scene when Diego was supposedly still with Lori. The data collected from Hernandez's phone did not contain any useful information for investigators. Shabana suspects that Hernandez's cell phone connection was lost before he contacted Bray. A list of Bray's phone records was obtained, which showed that Lori Bray and Hernandez had no contact through text messages or phone calls in the year before the murder. Jurors were also shown photos of scratches on Diego's face and photos of Lori's condition at the time of discovery. These images were too shocking for television and were never broadcast. Jurors agreed that Lori didn't stand a chance that night. Investigators said that the DNA found in Lori's car on her clothing and under her fingernails belonged to Diego. They also confirmed that the pants found in his home were bleached just hours after Lori's death. There was also a clear timeline of when Diego was near the deceased. After several days of both sides presenting their arguments and only 2 hours of deliberation, the jurors reached a verdict. They unanimously found Diego guilty of premeditated murder. Before the verdict, he asked to testify himself, and events took an unexpected turn. The man who had denied everything about the violence sat there for over a year and said, "I did it. I killed Lori." The audience was stunned, and the judge noted that in his 40-year career, he had never seen anything like it. Diego Hernandez was sentenced that day to life in prison, with a minimum of 35 years to serve before he can appeal. There is no information on whether or not he intends to appeal. The case has deeply affected many people, both those who knew them well and those who had never seen them before. The residents felt a collective sense of loss. One resident said that the closeness and safety everyone had felt before the incident had changed dramatically. They had all lost someone very special. Katia said, "Lori was just a very gentle, loving soul, and no matter what someone did, she only saw the good in people." Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.